The chances are you either have an idea in your mind, or maybe you have lots of ideas in your mind, or thirdly, maybe you're trying to figure out how to get to the idea that you should pursue and turn into a business. Let me just speak from my experience. I believe that for any idea that you're pursuing to be successful, it has to be first and foremost something that you would do regardless of remuneration and irrespective of the hurdles that you'll inevitably face. So you have to make sure you are incredibly passionate about that subject matter and about solving that problem in the world. If you're not, as Steve Jobs once said, any sane person would quit. There has to be a little bit of healthy insanity, which is sometimes manifested as passion and delusion, for you to pursue the thing long enough to see if your hypothesis was correct. So the first thing I'd say to anybody is not to sit down and try and think of an idea. I'm going to exclude that option because I don't believe you can brainstorm your way to a great business idea. I don't believe if it's not something you're innately passionate about, if it's not a thought you've already had or something you've already been involved in, you'll be able to find something by guessing that is going to be engaging enough for you at a psychological level for you to pursue it for long enough for it to work. So I'm going to assume that either you have an idea that's been mulling around in your head already, something you've seen, a passion you have, or you have lots of ideas and maybe too many and you don't know which one of your ideas to pick. Regardless of which camp you're in, one idea or lots of ideas, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions which I hope will help crystallize if these ideas are valid ideas that you should be pursuing. The first question I'd ask you, as I said a second ago, is this something that you're actually passionate about doing? A problem you're actually passionate about solving? When you've worked on this idea or in this industry before, has it been psychologically and internally fulfilling and rewarding? If the answer is yes, my next question is this within one of your areas of expertise? Now, I'm not saying you have to be a master. I'm not saying you have to be a black belt in this particular business or industry. I'm just saying, do you have some level of competence or experience in this area at all? That is incredibly important and incredibly helpful. This could just be a lived experience, a problem you spotted in the course of your life. It could also be an industry you might have worked in, working for or with someone else. But it's important to have some understanding of the problem and the context of the problem if you are to be the type of person to solve that problem. And thirdly, just want to double check, does this idea have the potential to pay you now or in the future? If it does, that's a business. If it doesn't, that's probably a hobby. The next really important thing to say is sometimes we think if we pursue two ideas at once, we're doubling our chances. But in reality, what you're actually doing is halving your chance. Because if you think about either of those ideas that you've chosen to pursue in isolation, your competition are giving 100% of their time, energy, and resources to competing against you. And if you go into business just giving 50% of your time, in a scenario where your competition are giving 100% of your time, your odds of success start halved from the get-go. If you are to succeed, especially at that early stage, especially if you don't have a huge amount of resources, it is integral that you pick just one idea and you get yourself out of that mindset of thinking that the more bets you place in terms of ideas, the higher your odds. In business, the inverse is true. The more things you give your time, attention, and focus to, the less chance each of them in isolation have of succeeding. You have to focus. And focus is difficult. It's easier said than done for all of us. I always have lots of new ideas every single day, but I know that those new ideas actually risk the chances of making the thing I'm currently focusing on successful. So what I do in my brain is I've installed this psychological someday shelf. And on my someday shelf, ideas that I'll pursue someday, I put on all the new ideas that pop in my mind. I leave them there on the someday shelf. And the interesting thing that happens by installing a someday shelf in your mind is you realize that by giving an idea time to breathe, you really are able to test whether it's something you actually wanted to pursue and commit your life to. The really important overarching thing here, which I think is the most important thing when you're deciding whether you should pursue an idea or not, is every successful person I've met that's built a great business, they've all had to put 3, 5, 10, 20 years of their life into that thing. So rushing into it isn't advisable. It's not a smart thing to do. Now, when I think about my ideas, I ask myself in my head, if I'm going to pull this one off the someday shelf, am I willing to give 5 years minimum of my life to pursuing that thing? Nothing happens overnight. Success doesn't happen overnight. So it's a big commitment, and understanding the cost of that commitment, I think, helps you understand if it's one worth making. So presumably now you're at the point where you have an idea that you want to take forward. And the first thing that I would do, and that I've always done in every business that I've ever founded in my life, is I make a 10-page deck. And you can make this 10-page deck in Word or on PowerPoint or in Canva, whatever suits you. The purpose of this 10-page deck, and the reason for the constraint of the 10-page deck, is to give yourself clarity on exactly what your idea is, how you're going to execute upon it, and the problem you're aiming at solving. By writing it down and getting it out of your head, you will see it entirely differently. And it's funny because in our heads, we can sometimes connect a couple of dots, but when we have the idea on paper and we have it across 10 slides, we see holes that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. We see issues in our hypothesis, and we see new opportunities within the idea itself. It's remarkable what getting it down on paper does for your psychology, for your perspective, and how it illuminates the whole picture. So every single time I'm creating an idea or a business of my own, or I'm advising a young entrepreneur who's pitching to me to deliver me their idea, I tell them to send me a 10-page deck. The first page of the deck is typically their logo and branding, which is an important thing to get clear on. And the last page of the deck is typically some kind of thank you, their email address, and their contact information. So really, the bulk of the deck is actually just those 8 slides. And in that deck, what you want to do is answer a couple of things. The first 1 or 2 pages of the deck should purely set the scene of the problem that you've spotted in the world that your business is going to solve. You're telling a story, the origin story of where you came across this challenge, where you saw it, and you're trying to impress upon the reader the opportunity, the urgency, and the importance of solving this problem. On the next slide of the deck, you want to show the viewer the current alternatives in the market to solving that problem. You really want to address how it's currently being solved. This again requires research on the existing competitive landscape, understanding exactly who those players are and exactly what they're doing. And in the third section, you want to highlight your new, innovative, better solution to solving that problem. And in that section, you want to highlight exactly the USPs, the unique selling points of your business, why that matches up to the way the world is going, how your solution is better suited to the market now and in the future, and why you have the authority, the credibility, the insights, the experience to solve the problem you described in the first section. Roughly, that means that each of those sections is about 2 to 3 pages long. And it's important to note that you don't have to get right down to nitty-gritty details in this deck. You don't need to have a full P&L and everything figured out, because this exercise, more than anything, is for you. And this deck will evolve over time. You're always going to have this 10-page deck. You'll probably have it for 5 to 10 years in your business. You'll add to it and change things as you realize them. The constraints of having it no more than 10 pages will mean that you continually have to crystallize your thinking. They always say the true essence of knowing someone understands something is their ability to simplify it. And that's what that 10-page constraint does for you. It will evolve, but having it allows you to understand properly the problem you're solving, how it's being solved and how you're different, and exactly how you're going to execute yourself on solving that problem in crystal clarity with the most important details, the top line, most compelling, most crucial details. Having that for yourself, I think, is an absolute game changer, because oftentimes when we're talking about our ideas to people we meet in the street or at a conference or at an event or on the phone, the issue we have is we sometimes, if you're like me, we forget key parts of it. And in doing so, we're never doing our idea justice. And what a shame that is, to have a great idea, but to keep stumbling it because you're trying to explain it or describe it verbally, the person on the other end never fully understands it or slightly misses the point of what you're trying to do and what your idea is. That happened to me for the first part of my career until I understood the importance of creating a 10-page deck, not least for myself, but also so that other people received the idea in its full glory. it's important to note, because this is something that often turns entrepreneurs off the pursuit of an idea, is it doesn't actually matter if someone in the market right now is currently running a business that's very similar to the way that you want to run it. Every single company I've ever started, when I looked out into the market, I found other people that were doing a similar thing. What I knew was that my approach to executing on my idea was slightly different, was slightly better. And in a saturated market, a slight iteration on the way that something's currently being done can result in a huge amount of value for the customers that are buying that service or product. The differentiator and the difference between success and failure will be you. It will be your perspective, your origin story, and the lived experience you've gained, and the way that you approach to solving that problem. All it takes is a slight iteration in how you solve a problem to create an incredibly big, successful business.